Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. As you all know at this point, the Muddy Waters Podcast exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on here in our state. The mainstream media, unfortunately, does two things. One, they are a propaganda arm of the left, and so they only tell you what the Democrats want you to hear from their perspective. And they also don't want you to pay attention to what's going on in your backyard. They want you to pay attention only to what Donald Trump is doing in DC or some other nonsense there. And so we exist in part because of that, to fill this void and talk about what's really going on in our state, talk to people from around the state about what they're doing, running for office, whatever it might be. That's what it is today. We fortunately, we have a couple other people who are doing a great job in Maine at bringing information to light. One of those, obviously, is the Maine Wire. Steve Robinson and team, John Featherston, who just recently joined, has been a great addition. They've got a number of other great people, but doing really great work. But the Unquirer on X, or Maine X community, has been off the chain recently with if you haven't checked them out, I recommend that you do, calling around, asking questions, and finding out how easy it is for somebody who is an illegal alien to get an ID and register to vote, for instance. Check out those videos, real calls where he's been calling people. You just have to check that out. So anyway, today, however, we have with us, we're fortunate to have a candidate for office in Bath, I believe, House District 50. Jed, is that right?
Yep, Bath District 50.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining us, Jed Rice, and thank you for being willing to do the crazy thing, I think, and run for political office in 2025. Which leads to a question like, what in the world would possess you to want to do that? And kind of, what's your story? Where do you come from? And kind of what's led you to this place? What have you been doing with your life? And what's led you to this place where you're like, you know what? I want to go and stand in front of bullets. So let us know.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Maine ever since I was a boy. I was born here. So you always see the place you grew up and you want it to keep it the same. But, as I grew and turned more into a man and understood the problems more, I realized that the place that we call Maine is really kind of just a placeholder for what it's what it used to be, really, because of how it's turning into something that we didn't grow up with. And so what really got me into politics, though, was just seeing how so many people in Maine are struggling to make ends meet nowadays. And my grandparents specifically struggled to make ends meet, and people hardly holding on to their stuff nowadays, the stuff that's rightfully theirs, and I don't think anyone should get into politics because they want to, necessarily for their own gain, but getting into politics for me is more of getting into politics because it's a right thing to do to help people. People want someone who looks out for them. And unfortunately, right now, we have a lot of politicians who don't look out for the people. So that's why I want to get into politics, because I want to help. I want to be the person that we used to have in America, the Teddy Roosevelts and such.
Yeah, somebody actually used the term recently that I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it might have been Rep Katrina Smith. She's the assistant leader in the House of the Republicans, the minority, and she made the comment that we're not politicians, we're statesmen. Statesmen. It's like, this is like, politician is obviously something that's looked down negatively because of how poorly we've been represented. But when done right, it's not politicians. It's like, yeah, we're statesmen. We're people, and I'm not in office, but I tried twice. But we're actually trying to do this as it was meant to be done, and actually represent the people for the good of the people, not for the good of ourselves.
Right. I imagine it, like I see it, you see in your head, the people is the person, but you are really just the microphone that they're holding. You're not supposed to be doing it for yourself. You're just telling the government what the people need and what the people want. That's what I believe in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So like, what is it? What are some areas, I think, that you see as you're exploring the political? I mean, obviously there are always issues that impact and kind of like, these are the things that really drive me to want to be involved. But like, what are the particular ways I think that you see that people are not being represented appropriately, or examples, or however you might put that?
I would have to say definitely people aren't being represented in how they want their children raised in schools. They're, kids are being taught things that don't make sense wholly. I'd say people are not being represented in, we get every politician comes in and they go on affordability and they should go on cutting things down, but people complain so much about electric bills, and it's just something that for the lower class Mainer, they can't keep up with. So that's something I would say, like education and electric are definitely, I think, top two in Maine. And it really just comes down to, because we have such an older population, Bath specifically even, and while Bath is a richer city for sure, per person, a lot of people in Maine are struggling. I grew up out in Bowdoin, so I know a lot of people out there are barely keeping the lights on. It's just people can barely keep it, like, afford stuff today.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is obvious and becoming more and more obvious over time is how big of an issue affordability is. Yeah, and they throw it around, but with that, I mean, one of the biggest factors here in the state of Maine is energy. We did an episode a couple back specifically on energy with a guy named Matt Jacobson. Because it's such a big issue. But yeah, it's hard to keep the lights on when the energy price, for instance, will just say rises 36% year over year. And right. So I used to work in banking. I was I wasn't a financial advisor. I had the licenses, but I wasn't a financial advisor. But as I would sit through some of those conversations, we would talk to people about like saving up enough money for retirement, right? And part of that was you in order to determine where you were going to be and whether or not you could afford to do the things that you wanted to do, is you had to factor in an idea of inflation, right? And how much. So, but like, your general rule of thumb is to estimate somewhere around 2 to 3% inflation. If you're aggressive, you might estimate 5%. But we've obviously seen, and this isn't the first time this has happened in history, right? We've seen like excessive. I mean, if your energy price is going up 36%, taxes are going up in the teens and 20% in a lot of towns. Like, these things are obviously exceeding inflation. And, but when these people planned for their retirement income, or let's say they're living largely off of Social Security never keeps up effectively with inflation. They have cost of living adjustments, but it's never enough to keep up with inflation. And neither are many of these people's retirement plans projections. There's no way they could have anticipated this. So we're even if you've got people who made really wise financial decisions, and planned well for retirement, they may be in positions where they were like, geez, I think one of the gubernatorial candidates, Owen McCarthy, usually shares that he has an uncle who's named Thump, if I'm not mistaken, who is in his 70s and had to go back to work in the woods because he couldn't afford to live, right? And like, so when we see these types of situations, like that's problematic, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And
I just saw right on social media the other day, exact same story. This 70, 80-year-old man had to go back to work because his wife fell ill and he had to use his retirement fund to pay for her bills. And what do you do when you're in that situation? But luckily, his coworkers were able to set up a fund and he got enough donations that he was able to retire. But you know, shouldn't be on a knife's edge like that, really. People need a little bit of wiggle room, especially when they've gotten to that age in their life when they deserve just a little bit of wiggle room, just a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, so obviously, like I think you'd said, energy. What was the other issue that you think is parental rights and education? So you don't think that parents are being well represented in the schools? You don't think that teachers and like administrators really should know best what should be happening to people's children?
Well, I don't know honestly how much representation they're getting with their schools, but I do think that there's a serious problem, and I've talked to this with my family so much. I just, the uncle just rambling, but I talked to them about how I feel like school systems aren't teaching kids what they need to know coming up, but not as much as what they need to know, but also not enough American heritage to where, it's hard to explain, but kids nowadays, they're being taught this curriculum in school to where America's the number one bad guy and we've only done bad things and we're known for slavery, but nobody talks about, they aren't taught the good things that we did anymore. And hardly they were when I went to school. They aren't taught the good things. And I don't even know what the bad things they're being taught in school nowadays are. But the big problem with education that I think is it's being, I don't want to say weaponized, but it's almost being weaponized as a tool to discredit who we are as America.
Yeah. 100%. I definitely think it's being used as a weapon to really turn the youth and in an effort to control people. I'd say they've been definitely. Yeah, it's again. I say it's wild a lot on here just because it's crazy to think about like where we've gotten to in our society, where like you have a substantial number of people defending the idea of teaching sexuality. And gender identity nonsense to kids that are relatively young. I mean, whether or not that should even be taught in the school in the first place, right? It definitely shouldn't be being taught at the ages that it's being taught at. And for the record, I don't think it should be being taught at all. I think parents, that's in the realm of parents teaching their kids values. Not the school should not be the ones that are kind of overseeing that for sure. But yeah, so it's pretty wild and crazy. And you talk about like the fact that it's interesting that they I think it was like last year Pender Macon was talking about how we're not worried about education, like reading, writing, arithmetic. We're focused on creating good global citizens, whatever the heck that means. And we don't need to worry about these traditional things because of AI, right? She was basically trying to argue that AI, and she's the head of the education department in Maine, so she's like the president or whatever of the Department of Education, or she's the chair, or whatever it is. And she's saying it doesn't matter because we need to focus on SEL, and we don't need to worry about it because of AI, right? That's what they were saying. Now that they're like, oh crap, we got an election to win. We got big elections coming up this next year, and now they're talking about how we need to get back to teaching the fundamentals. It's like, we've been saying that for a couple of years
Right.
now, and you've been ignoring us and saying that we're right-wing radicals. And now, because you realize that the people are listening to us because we're actually making sense, you're like, oh crap, we gotta fix the education system. It's like, you created it, right?
Right.
And
We went from teaching kids Latin in school to barely speaking English. Like, I remember going through high school and kids were struggling to read paragraphs out of books. Like, it's just gotten to such a bad spot in Maine. I don't know where we rank as a nation in Maine.
it
It's
depends
like,
on the study. There are a number of different studies,
yeah,
and so it's somewhere between like the mid 30s and 50.
yeah,
So
it's like middle of the pack, lower of the pack. But like, New England is supposed to be renowned for how smart we are, but like, our school systems are just and it's not the kids' fault. Definitely, it's the school systems just completely failing. But I also am a firm believer that our school systems don't get enough as well. I think teachers are criminally underpaid, and I think that if we really cared about our kids, we would put more resources into it, to then we can teach the correct curriculum.
Yeah, so it's interesting because traditionally Republicans like to say, let's slash it. Libertarians more.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
Ron Swansonism. But also Republicans tend to be that way, and especially with education, that's one of the biggest budget items. But I think, like, there is even a belief amongst a lot of conservatives that teachers being paid more would not be a bad thing. The problem is all the other money that's being spent in education that's actually not going toward education. But so you would be in favor of giving raises to teachers?
Yes, absolutely. Just pulling another story out of my hat, I remember going to high school with this teacher, Mr. Martin, Terrence Martin, and great guy, but they're so underpaid. I remember his wife fell down with cancer, and he could barely keep it going. He's fallen at the seams, unfortunately. And when you have such a job that you're responsible for a whole group of, and at his level, a high school level, a whole grade of kids, you really should be compensated for that. And then you got to go home to your regular life, and then you got to come back the next day, and you're responsible for making these children into upstanding citizens who will, who they're supposed to be upholding our values. And so I think that really deserves compensation.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So I ran, this is one of the issues that I ran on, not paying teachers per se, but like the problem in the education system. Like, what is the problem? What's the root of it?
Right.
And obviously paying teachers is making sure that you have high quality teachers, which includes paying them. But have you how much research have you done into this at this point to determine, like, because we are having a lot of teachers leave the education system, and I wonder, like, there's some stuff I've heard anecdotally from some people around the reasoning behind why they're leaving. But have you looked into that at all? Obviously, you're in the early stages of running a campaign. I'm not expecting you to be an expert in all things. I've been like hyper focused on this, doing a podcast for a year and a half. And involved in, I ran for office for the first time in 2022. So this has been something I've been doing deep dives into. But like, what have you found as you've looked into that so far?
I haven't, and I haven't looked into it deep yet, but you were bringing up, talking about the root cause, and that's exactly how I think of it too. I want to find out, everyone believes if you throw money at the problem will go away, but it's exactly like you said. We have to figure out what the money is going to, that they already have. So that's what I believe in it. I want, that's how I operate. I like looking at an issue. You can't look at it. There's always deeper layers with every issue. Everything has a reaction. So I want to, like you said, take a deeper dive into it, show what's going on, why, where's all this money going? How are we spending this money? Why is things not turning out correctly? And then, from that point, figure out, do teachers need more money? Do X, Y, and Z, stuff like that. But No, at this point, I haven't looked into it much, but exactly like you said, you got to look into everything when it comes to just throwing money at the problem.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where it's good to have. It's kind of funny. Have you ever seen the movie The Pursuit of Happiness? It's really
Familiar.
really great movie. Will Smith, he's this like guy trying to survive, and he decides he wants to be
Oh,
a
yep,
stockbroker, right? So he goes into this interview, and because of some circumstances, he's like not in a suit and tie like he would normally be, and anyway, and they basically ask him some questions. He's like, if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that I don't know the answer. But you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to research and I'm going to find the answer, because that's the type of person I am. And I think like some people have this attitude and they're like, oh my gosh, you're running for office and you don't already know the answer to that. And it's like, first of all, the people in Augusta don't know the answer either. Even though they're already there are a lot of people in Augusta who are representing other people and don't have the answers to these questions, aren't even researching them. Like half of them are just sitting there saying, what's the party say I'm supposed to think about this? So like, let's be very clear about that. But also there's a lot of time between now and then. And there are a lot of really complex issues. That's the other thing, is like the issue of education, I think is very complex. And as I looked into it, there are a couple of like concerns that are kind of hard to overcome with simplicity. I look at this and I'm a Christian. That's core to who I am. And I'm like, without God, we're in trouble. Even if we do all the right things, without God, we're in trouble. But one of the things that I think I appreciate about what you said already is saying like, okay, you can't just throw more money. You're advocating, I think our teachers are underpaid, which I think is true, by the way. If other people are out there, one of the other fun facts that I learned as I was preparing for my race in 2024 is that our teachers are, we live in one of the most expensive states to live in. That's the reality. And our teachers are paid 34th or 36th highest in the nation. We spend like 9th highest in the nation, but our teachers are paid like 36th highest, which means they're below average, but we're one of the most expensive states to live in.
Yeah, right.
And so it's like, how can we expect good people who have talent that they could obviously use elsewhere to stay in the education system and continue to teach children if we are not paying them enough to be able to survive? So that's a reality. But as you said too, like just throwing more money at the problem isn't the answer. We've got to figure out what is going on and why are our kids not performing at a high level. And there are a couple of factors that I would say that are important. I'll just bring up for fun, for free. But is parental engagement and involvement. I think most of the experts will tell you that is the number one most significant deciding factor in the success or failure of a child, is how involved and engaged are the parents. If they're involved and engaged, kids do well, generally speaking. If they're not, kids do poorly, generally speaking. And that's where I say, like, this is a big issue. And like, how do we fix that? How much can the education system engage parents in their children's education? That's a challenge. It's on the parents. So if your parents out there, don't sit back and be like, the school system will take care of my kids. Well, they may take care of them in a way that you don't approve of, number one, but number two, that's not going to lead to success with your kids. And so I just feel like that's for free. So education obviously is one that's really important to you. And I love that. It's obviously really important to me too. Are there any other issues that you're particularly passionate about that are part of the things that you want to fix? Obviously there's important issues that need to be addressed that most people are going to get riled up about. And I think parental rights and education is something that your conservatives in particular and parents are going to get really riled up about. And then obviously like I say affordability, but energy is what you said. Those are those are two important issues. Are there any other issues that you're like really passionate about, or you've got, you want to focus on if you have the opportunity to represent in Augusta?
Just for Bath, really, education and energy. We mentioned it a little before the show, but
Yeah.
energy is just, it's out of control. Nuclear energy, I know it's a hot topic, but I'm really for nuclear energy. It's really safe.
Yep.
We know how to use it. So I'm really for that. Maine Yankee, that going away, that was a shame, crime. But there's really not much. I don't want to say it's a problem because it's absolutely not a problem, but I want to help Bath stay sufficient without tourism. So I don't want
Hmm.
Bath to turn into a town that is required to have tourism to stay alive. And that's kind of what's happening with we have our main streets downtown. That's kind of what's happening. They're turning into these tourists. Everything is closing. I just saw in Portland some places getting fined because I can't remember what it was about, but he stayed. I don't remember what I was talking about, but everything is being catered
Well,
to.
Well, I can probably tell you.
What's
Yeah. So
that?
I'm assuming the thing in Portland has to do with the fact that they're finding businesses for not, finding property owners for not leasing properties. So if they don't have it rented out, they have to
Yeah,
pay a
yeah.
penalty,
I, I'm
or they can display certain forms of art as a in order to not get fined if their place is empty. I don't understand. It's weird. But
Yeah, I was just reading stuff like that, and we're slowly turning into a tourism state where all of our money is dictated by who comes up here and which one's up here. Like in Bath, there's so many houses right on the river that aren't lived in until summer. These people which is fine, but we need to keep Bath in a way as its own loyal population that can still raise a family without the fear of tourism being the town's required source for money.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting is our mantra on our license plate is vacation land, but you'd rather have Maine be
Uh,
known for something else. I mean, it's beautiful landscape here, and like you've got lakes, mountains, rivers, and the ocean. Like we're always going to be, a place that people come to for
oh
tourism
yeah.
reasons. But you don't want you want it to be essentially what I think what I'm going to say that I'm hearing is you want it to be a place where people can just live and raise a family and not simply rely only on tourism, but we actually maybe be a state that has industry as well.
Yep, that is exactly what I mean. Yep. Be more specifically, I suppose, like if someone opened a shop right in here in Bath, they would severely struggle outside of tourism. I've seen so many shops close here in town, but that's exactly what I'd love to see. I'd love to see the industrialization of Maine. What And I am the number one guy. I will never say chop down a tree, you better not. But I would love to just see Maine be a little more self-reliant.
So explain that. So are you saying like from an environmental, you're like kind of more on the environmental side, or
No,
you
I
don't
just
like to
I
chop
just
down
mean I
trees?
just mean that I just mean that I grew up in Bowdoin out in the woods, I just love that Maine is still the wilderness, and living
Oh
in a
yeah.
place where it's still old America. It's such a nice feeling, warms my heart really. And that's more so what I mean. I mean, I like preserving the image of what Maine is. So I don't like the idea of too much industrialization, but I do believe in self-reliance.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, one of the things I love about Maine, and I say this, I've been a bunch of places at this point. I used to be just around America, but now my wife is from Rwanda, currently lives in Kenya, and I've been to a couple other places over there, obviously Uganda, Egypt, um, but even within the United States, anywhere I go, I'm always so excited to come back to Maine because I don't know, I can't find a place that I think has a better, like, first of all, it's got a small town community feel, which I'm for growth. Those people who want to just keep it small town and we don't ever want to grow too big, like I'm okay with growth, I'm okay with growth. I don't want to lose what you said makes it Maine. And I think part of that is like one of my favorite things to say about Maine is in our biggest city, you could get lost and die in the woods. But it's true. I mean, you could, if you start out on a path, you lose your bearings, you forget which way is which, you trying to get out, you could keep walking and maybe never find your way out, and you could die in the woods. Like that's in our biggest,
true.
That's in our biggest city, and it is like being very wooded and forest, and nature is one of the big things here in the state of Maine, which is interesting. But this will it'll come right back to like the energy thing. So like two things. In order to be industrial, not too industrial to the point where we lose the character of Maine, but in order to like actually attract businesses and have businesses grow to the point where there are better jobs and more jobs for people, they need to be able to afford energy, right? That's really, really important. The other point I was going to make, is totally flew out the window. So whatever I was going to say, I don't know. But yeah, it needs to be affordable. We need to be able to bring businesses into Maine to be able to make it so that people can live here.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It's a big circle, affordability. And if it's not affordable, nobody's going to move up here. If nobody moves up here, it's all going to rely on tourism. If it all relies on tourism, well, then we're in a bad place in general. But, it all circle, and you can even factor teaching into that. If our teaching is poor up here, if we're raising poor adults intellectually, nobody's going to want to move to start a family up here. Nobody wants their children to say plainly, to come out as dummies. They want a good education for their kids. So it's all a big circle, just like you said. If you look and dig into the layers, everything has a reaction. And everything.
Well, and this is playing out to be true. I've talked to some people on the coast that are saying that their town is now like 75% out of staters. And these are mostly people that have retired and left, or this is their second home or something like that. So they're not up here, like, raising a family. And right. Also Maine-born people, generally speaking, the ones who do stay are not having kids at nearly the rates that they used to. So if it weren't for this incredible influx of illegal immigrants to the state of Maine, we would be woefully below the number of students that we historically have had. Like the high schools are declining in their populations, and that's with having brought in a ton of people from outside the country, whose kids are now going through the system, which is one of the challenges. I'm not anti-immigrant. Let's be very clear. I'm really hoping my wife will be here shortly, in the near future. That's actually what I'm hoping for, right? I'm pro legal immigration. Do I think we need a little bit tighter until we can figure out what the heck is going on in our own country? Yep. But I'm fine with legal immigration. I don't have a problem with these children, right? It's nothing to do with that. But the reality is, like, having kids that don't speak English be a part of the school system makes it really challenging for the teachers to teach, since some of the kids don't understand the language, right? And so the lowest common denominator wins. And so if you have a kid that's at this lowest level, this is how the teachers teach. They teach to the lowest level, by and large. And so that's one of the additional challenges. But again, part of the point that was bringing that up is, like, without those kids, our schools would be, especially in particular in certain areas, but like, I think we're having declining populations anyway, even including bringing in a bunch of people from outside the country. So we're not having enough kids, and people with kids are not moving here. And that's not good for the long-term, sustainability of the state.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Bath, I like to use Bath as an example. It's a very old population city. I think more than 50% of people here are retiring. Like, it's like a 8,500 person city, and 4,000 people are like working people. So it's exactly like you said. They're not coming here to have children, so they aren't being treated like normal citizens. and that affects the economy. It affects how things are priced. It affects how our energy is used because they aren't working, they aren't putting into it, but they have this money stored up, which they've worked their whole lives for. So, and I keep bringing up this circle, but it really is, affordable housing would help lessen the burden on the Maine people. Or I said housing, excuse me, affordable electricity, energy. And if we help alleviate the burden, that would, people always say, why aren't you having kids? You ask someone, why aren't you having kids? They always say the economy. It's not right because things cost too much. Well, and this is just me thinking, of course, but maybe if we lower these costs a little bit, actually, maybe do some of these things we've been promising, maybe then people will start actually having kids. People start seeing their electricity go down and think, well, maybe we can actually afford to have a kid or two now. And, it's a big circle to where if we help lower the cost for the Maine people, it really works for the benefit of everyone, because then we have more people are having kids. And then if we have more kids, we can get more funding for the school system. But even without that, I would really hope to help fund. But regardless, it's all big one circle. Everything plays off each other in one way or another.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Well, I want to go to like the housing, because I do think that's something that would be fun to talk about. But yeah, no, I agree. I agree in large part. I do think part of the problem is that people, and maybe you share your perspective on this, or if you've heard anything about this, but like I feel like our society is anti-child. Our society is trying to, and it seems like, I think they're trying to push people to be like, oh, it's too expensive to have kids, and so people don't have kids because it's too expensive to have kids. And it's like, man, I see an awful lot of poor people having kids, and they're doing just fine. I mean, I'm not saying they're doing just fine, but clearly they're surviving financially. And so I'm not saying children don't cost, but I also think that maybe people aren't aware of the fact that our tax structures and like some of the other things like have these really great benefits to make it so that it's easier to afford to have children on purpose. And like Trump's tax credits, he's not the only one, but like he increased the tax credits for people who have children. And there's a lot of other elements that are positively impacted to kind of ease the burden of the financial thing. But do you find that, like, what are your thoughts on that, I guess?
I would have to, I completely agree. 5 years ago, I would say that people were, back then, 5 years ago, people were saying, well, the economy's not quite right. But people nowadays, when they say that, I take them largely, I agree with them that it's not really right to have a kid unless you are well off or, sucking off the government. It's really hard but I feel like a lot of that was, a psych up from Hollywood. We had all those movies back in the 2010s of you don't need kids, focus on your career, or you don't need kids, focus on having fun, and I think it was clearly, I don't have to think, clearly it has done something to America as a whole. But I would agree largely with that people aren't having kids anymore. And, it's hard to put it on one. I can't put it on one specific reason on why people aren't having kids, obviously, but I would largely put it on the economy. A lot of people say it's because of religion. I don't fully buy into that. I think that America was good at reproducing anyways as a mostly faith-free nation, if that makes sense. But I think a lot of it had to do with pushing people in the ways of going to careers and forcing the economy to be unlivable pretty much by yourself.
Yeah. I don't know where you feel about this, but like I think a part of it is like pushing women in particular to believe that they need to focus on their career more than do what would probably be more likely to make them happy. Married women with children who are able to spend a lot, not have to work full-time careers. I think the data, feel free to research it, are much more satisfied in life than those who have quote unquote successfully advanced in their careers. So Did I lose you? No, you're there. Okay. I think you might be a little bit behind me. Have you caught back up yet? You here?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is just a little delayed. I think it's caught up now.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think a big part of it has to do with the more the way that the culture has shifted and told women to not focus on kids, but focus on their career. In particular, men, whether you have kids or not, you better be focused on your career. So,
I would agree. I agree with that statement. I grew up with I grew up raised by just my mother, and we lived with my grandmother, her mother. So I believe that statement is correct, that we are more women are being pushed into careers. But I also, you look at something like Poland, where they offer these huge tax cuts to women who, based on number of kids they have with their married husband. It's hard to say that we should do something like that. Like, we should incentivize having kids like that, especially where we live in a place where so many abuse the government laws we have already. But I feel like that is what we need to help combat the career lifestyle, if that makes sense. We need more incentives to not even staying home. You don't have to stay home to raise a family, but you do largely have to stay home. But we need more incentives to creating a family and staying together as a family.
well, absolutely. And I think, like, how, I don't know if it necessarily needs to mirror what they're doing in Poland, but I do think that one of the things that I've thought about a lot is, and I think I mentioned this on a recent podcast when I had Lisa Kime on, is that, like, the deadbeat dad scenario, where we have so many, like, single moms raising kids by themselves, and dad is not paying child support, and the state is instead somehow taking care of the mom and the children. And, like, what are the consequences? Now, technically, I'm sure there are consequences. Eventually, they'll track down, and he'll be way behind if the dad tries to file his taxes. Any of the tax return that he would get will end up going. But it's still, that's not sufficient, and it's not fixing the problem, right? And I think our current system actually incentivizes people to make poor decisions and people to be single, right? Like, I know people who literally didn't get married because, and like, not actually going through the act of getting married actually does have a psychological impact on the relationship that's not good.
Oh.
It's this, like, anxious, like, there's this anxiety that people have when they know, that when it's not settled, if that makes sense. But I know people who have literally not gotten married because it would financially hurt them, because the system was better for them being single, living together while having kids. Technically, they were single, right?
And that just doesn't make sense.
Look, why are we incentivizing that, right? So if we're going to incentivize something, it should be the nuclear family. Right. That's what we need to do. And that's where these, like, child tax credits that they're doing, I think, again, as much as things can be abused, I do think that those are a step in the right direction, and we figure out how to do more of that. I don't want to, like, do the 2 years worth of maternity leave, but that they do some places in Europe, I think that's a little bit excessive, and it's basically paid for by the government, which I have a friend of mine who lives here in America, but brings that up all the time about how much better it is there. And I'm like, go. I mean, I don't say that.
Yeah.
Maybe I do. I might have said it to her.
Yeah,
but
right.
Anyway, but I'll joke about it anyway, because it's like, if it's so good, go there. Like, well, because there's obviously a reason that you're here. Even if you like that feature and benefit, clearly there's something about being in America that you see as being better than that. So.
Yeah. And we always hear that too, especially growing up. We always hear, "Oh, you live in America? What's it like paying for healthcare?" Well, I mean, I'll actually go get to see the doctor today, so that'll be nice. But just like you said, they come here for a reason. I don't need to go to Sweden. I don't need to go to Norway or Germany. But they need to come here. So.
Yep. No, that makes sense. So I feel like I might have missed something in your intro, and my like brain is like, so you grew up in Maine. What town did you grow up in?
Yep. I grew up. I was born out in Bowdoin,
Oh yeah,
but
you
I
said
moved to Bath. Yeah, I moved to Bath when I was a young boy. So I essentially grew up right here in Bath.
that. Okay, and did you end up going to college or?
Nope. After high school, I joined the Marine Corps.
Thank
Did
you.
that.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
You should have led with
And then
I'm a veteran. You got to be. All right, go ahead.
well, I wanted to get right into the topics,
Yeah.
but I did that. I left when I got discharged out when the whole COVID vaccine hoopla. But and then I came back home, and well, to be clear, when I joined, I was actually deployed up here. I was a reserve Marine, so I was up here, got out of the Marines, and just went right to work. I went to work at BIW, bounced around a little bit, but I'm actually going back to BIW. Me personally, I'm a huge BIW supporter. Like Bath built is best built. People always talk crap about Maine, we're so small, but hey, which other state could say they put out the best warships in the world's history? So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, no, that's a great. So, once again, thank you for your service. And I ask about college more out of curiosity, not because I think having a college education is necessarily terribly valuable. I went to the University of Maine at Farmington, got a degree there, and I feel like most of what I learned outside of the classroom, and it was the type of adulting type of stuff that you could have learned if you had a job and had an apartment.
Right.
And so,
what'd you get your degree in?
Mathematics. I was a business econ major for 3 years, and then I shifted and ended up getting a math degree, which was fun. Math for me, easy, pretty fun. I'd
like to go back to college. Well, I'd like to go back to school one day. I hated school growing up, but now that I'm older, like history, I could sit down and read about history for hours on end. There's nothing quite like learning when you're an adult compared to learning when you're a kid. Learning when I was a kid was not something I was into, I guess.
A lot of people aren't. I don't think you see the value. This is one of the problems. If we go back to education, one of the problems in the education system is that kids are trying to learn things without being able to practically exercise them, if that makes sense. It's like, in a lot of ways, the education system as it currently sits is almost like all practice and no games, to use a sports analogy.
Yeah.
Right. And so like the practical, like, what does this matter for? Right. Like, how does this impact my life? Then you go out and you try to live a life and you're like, oh, yeah, there's some things that it would have been valuable for me to remember from the stuff that I'd learned, but it was so far back ago that I've forgotten. Right. Now, some of the principles, and this is where, like, I remember in middle school and high school. Yeah, I think we'll say middle school. Right. When we were dealing with like a lot of homework, or it felt like a lot, and it's like, oh my gosh. And they're like, we're just trying to prepare you for high school. And I got to high school and I thought, okay, this is easier than middle school. So I don't know what they were preparing me for, right? And then I got to college, they're preparing me for college, and I got to college, and I was like, this is easier than high school. Like, what are we talking about? And what I didn't realize and I didn't see is that it was easier because of what I'd come from, and the patterns, like how to learn, how to like reason, how to come to conclusions, how to do homework, whatever it is. Now I know how to do that. I'm much better at it. I can do it quicker. And so, yeah, that's the reason my base had been formed. And so now I can build off of that much easier at those levels, which a lot of people don't necessarily think about. But I think there is also, like I said, there's that, like, what does this matter to my life? Like, why do I care about this? And the education system doesn't do enough to kind of like help people see how this relates to real life. Especially, I feel like high school, half of your time should be outside of the classroom, doing internships and stuff like that, and working in businesses or working on a farm or something along those lines, so that you actually get a practical experience of what real life is like, which will help inform and motivate you to maybe do something more significant potentially, or just like help form where you want to go with your life. I think a lot of the problem I have with higher education is that it's a waste of time. So history, for instance, I would say, don't go Don't go to college.
I know, right?
Like you're not going to be able to get a job in it, most
Right.
likely.
What are you going to do
You're
with a
just gonna-
history degree?
You're going to throw away $80,000, maybe $100, to be able to know a little bit more about World War II.
Right.
And if you're interested, by the way, highly recommend podcast. This guy's not a conservative, but well worth listening to. Is what is it? Gosh, Dan Carlin. What is his podcast called? Hardcore History. There it is. Hardcore History with Dan Carlin. He's got one that's called A Blueprint for Armageddon. Most of his are related to war, but not all of them. But the Blueprint for Armageddon is actually all about World War I. I'm listening to the Martyr Made podcast with the controversial Daryl Cooper. Controversial because he made a comment suggesting that Churchill, and he says he was making it hyperbolically, but either way, it's saying that Churchill was the real villain or might have been the villain of World War II. And it's like, okay,
I've heard that a lot. A lot of people say that, talking about Churchill. That's an odd one out there.
It's interesting. So being somebody who's like spent a lot of time studying World War II, it's fascinating to me. I actually have a poster of Churchill and one of his quotes on my wall. So I tend to think relatively favorably of Churchill and the necessity of him specifically in World War II. There are some things that he did that I think caused indirectly like famines in India. I think as a result of some of the things that he did, caused lots of people to die, which is one of the first times I heard somebody make a reference to him and the atrocities that he committed in World War II. He was like a very war-oriented guy in World War I. With Gallipoli and his kind of failure there. But ultimately he was he was very important and necessary, I think, to winning the war. It's interesting. This is not to do with Maine politics, but one of the things that Daryl Cooper says on Tucker Carlson's podcast, and this is where I'm like, I can't get where he's gotten, is essentially that if not for Churchill kind of motivating and keeping the people of the UK to a place where they wouldn't agree to a peace deal with Hitler, then the war might have ended. And if the war had ended, then it wouldn't have been nearly as bloody. Essentially, it's like, well, I mean, Hitler's plan was to kill the Jews. Like, if you read Mein Kampf, he hated them. He saw them to be the problem. Like he called it the Jewish problem. In fact, you weren't going to stop the Holocaust, because he tries to kind of make the argument that part of the reason they killed a lot of the people that they killed in the Holocaust was because there was a memo that was sent out that said, well, we don't have enough food to feed these people. And so, if maybe it would be more humane to just kill them and save them from having to starve to death, right?
And which that's what they've done in war throughout all history. If you can't feed the prisoners, well, what are we going to do with the prisoners, unfortunately?
Right. And so and that memo did go out. And so, but it seems like there's this well, that's the only reason the Holocaust, not the only reason. And again, this is a gross oversimplification, but it seems like that's part of the, Churchill's the reason that the war didn't end earlier, and he stalled it when he could have, and he did a lot of bombing of cities. But there are some things that he did. I'm not going to defend Churchill for sure, but in entirety. But I do think that we needed that war not to end because we needed to oust Hitler. And he was going to do evil things to the Jews anyway. Did we speed up his process? Absolutely. But it was going to happen. That was always part of the plan. So anyway, really interesting. But Daryl Cooper's, I'm listening to him talk about World War I right now on Martyr Made, and it's compared to Dan Carlin's The Blueprint from Armageddon, it's not even worth listening to. But it's fine. Anyway, that's an aside. But history, if you're looking for history, I highly recommend that. But and anybody else, hardcore history is great.
Antiquity. I love Edward Gibbons. You ever read his work? Yeah. No. He has a 6-part, I think it's 6-part volume on the history and decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I love like
Oh,
Roman Empire
yeah.
all the way, like starting from ancient Greece all the way up to like Napoleon's era. I love that history. All that stuff is so good. I could sit down and read for hours. But Edward Gibbons is really good. Again, not part of Maine politics, but that's a really good read, Edward Gibbons.
Well, what's interesting and how this does relate to Maine politics, as it relates to politics, is the fact that those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. Right? This is a famous quote, and so that's why it's so important to study history, to pay attention. I remember one of the most disappointing things to me was during COVID, when we were in lockdown, and I saw this funny thing. I thought it was funny, right? It was both bad and funny. But it was a screenshot of somebody in social media saying, "Hey, there's this business open that's not supposed to be. Is how do I report it?" And somebody replied, "You can use the Gestapo app." And and the girl responded, "Great, thanks. The most disappointing thing, I showed this to a ton of people. They didn't get it. They didn't get it." And it's like, college educated individuals who didn't know who the Gestapo was and didn't understand that this type of behavior is exactly what they were doing, in Germany in World War II, leading up to World War II. Getting people arrested for doing things that you should be able to do. Like, the government should not be telling a business that it can't open. Sorry.
No.
It's ridiculous.
No, absolutely not. And just like you said, it does relate to Maine politics history. I mentioned I was on Michael Heath's podcast morning show. He asked me what got me into politics, and I told him this would have actually been a good answer when we're talking about history. But I love reading history, so I'm reading these things, and I remember one day I'm reading about the Peloponnesian War, and Pericles has this great speech, and he talks about, and he says, those who refuse to participate in politics risk being governed by their inferiors. And I read that, and I was like, well, dang, man. Well, if I don't step up in politics, who's going to tell me what to do, and who's going to decide what's right, So you're right. History, absolutely. And again, going back to school, I didn't care about it at all when I was in school. I loved the masculinity, like Achilles and Odysseus, but I didn't care for the lesson of history. But now that I'm an adult, I see the knowledge in it, and I see how it impacts who I am and the decisions I make.
Well, it's so interesting that one of the problems in education too is that so they're taking the fun out of it in some ways, right?
Yeah.
So in class, the question was do you remember how many cousins so-and-so had from chapter 3 of whatever book, right? And it's like, what? It's boring. Right. The question is boring. It's like what you're trying to get at is, did you read it and do you remember these important notes? They're trying to get at reading comprehension, but the way in which they're going about it is in one of the most boring ways possible. You should want kids to like learning, and so you got to ask questions that get at whether or not they read the book, but also do it in such a way that they actually enjoy responding.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Yeah. Because
and I'm embarrassed to say this story, but learning in school was so boring. Yeah. So I remember in high school, your sophomore or freshman or whatever, and I don't know how common it is across Maine, but in southern Maine, along the coast at least, it's very common to in high school, and doing that spreadsheet is just so gosh darn boring doing that. So I quickly figured out, I realized, sitting in class, 15-year-old me, wait a minute, there's a Great Gatsby movie I can just watch. It's, that's exactly right. Learning has gotten so boring to where students look for any alternative in it. Just like with AI, kids don't care about learning. So it's easier to use a tool to just get the answers you're looking for rather than being engaged with what you're working with and actually being interested.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm not saying it's easy to teach, by the way. This is not me being
Oh,
too
no.
hypercritical. And there are challenges there, but you should be like picking books that are entertaining and educational as best as possible. You can't always, some of learning is just going to be boring. That's just the reality. And if we don't want to be ruled by our inferiors, we're going to have to read a lot of really boring law and try and interpret what the heck it means and how it can be used. There's no cheat sheet for that. We try to create them, but there isn't enough of a cheat sheet. For a lot of these laws. I remember I look at them and I'm like, what in the heck is this law? Like, because like there's how the law is written, and it's like in this archaic format of like, it just looks archaic. I can't have another word for it. And so I look at it and I'm like, what the heck is that even saying? And it's not because I'm not smart. It's because it's like, it seems like it's written in just an older way of communicating things that is not necessarily as clear, but also laws. A lot of times we call this the Muddy Waters podcast. It's not because I'm trying to make the waters muddy. It's because the waters are muddy. Like, it's just complex. And some of the political muddy water nature is intentional, right? Like, they actually don't want you to understand it. And because if it's clear, a lot of times the people are going to be upset about it and not want that law to be passed. And so they intentionally will pass things in such a way that is very complex. And it's like, what does that even mean? And then once it's law, and they already know how it's going to be interpreted if it gets challenged, right? Because they're connected to the current Supreme Court, right? If we're talking about the Democrats, then they already know, how this is going to end up being applied. But the average person is like, what in the world is this doing? And again, I think there's an element of that that's important. But this gets at the need for still doing the boring learning and why that's necessary. But yeah, education, I think. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we saw that exactly happen with question 2 this past year. The law written in an ambiguous way to where it didn't make sense for people, and people got confused by how it was worded.
Was it question? I don't even remember question 2 so much. Question 1 was the one that I was just the most like, what the heck?
Yeah, question 1. Sorry, question 2 was the gun law thing. Yeah, question 1.
Yeah, well, and it was the red flag law, but obviously it didn't call itself a red flag law. I think that one was worded, do you want to enact an extreme risk protection order to protect against people with mental health issues, whatever it was. Like, it was worded in a way that I think those things were not worded well, is the short version. But yeah, question 1 was pretty ridiculous. That was more
that was awful.
Do you want to make it harder for people to vote and make it so it's anyway, that's essentially, it's more complex than that, but everything trying to make it, do you want to restrict, do you want to not do this, do you want to and make other changes to Maine's election laws, right? It's like,
and the worst part of it was how it tricked people with the mail-in ballots. It never took it away, but is very clearly written in a way that made it seem that way.
Well, one of them, like, too, on that, was where it says the thing about, like, do you want to make it so that people can't call to request a ballot? It's like, well, they actually can call to request a ballot. They just will have to fill out a paper form that they'll get sent to them. They also could have. Anyway, it's really, that one's really annoying to me because they twisted it, and it was really good legislation. And I know that people are like, well, if they had just done a clean voter ID and they didn't include absentee ballots, it's like, would it have passed? Probably. I'd be interested to see what Bellows would have done with it then. But it also, like, I feel like if it was just a clean voter ID law, I also don't think it would have made a significant impact in our elections. Because if there's fraud happening in our elections, my guess is it's mostly happening in the absentees, not in the in-persons. That's right.
It definitely wouldn't be. It definitely wouldn't be a solution. It would definitely be a small patch. That's for sure.
Yeah. So, well, any other issues that you want to talk about that you think are important to your eventual campaign, or do you have a website yet? Have you started working on a website or a Facebook page or something like that for your campaign?
Nope. I just have my ex Twitter account. I haven't made any of those pages. I've been told that I need to make an account for people go check out.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a really great idea. So people who are looking, I mean, people aren't going to be just the way Maine people are in general, or
Right.
they're not thinking about. Again, they're far too focused on what Trump is doing and whether or not he's bombed another drug smuggler, to pay attention to what's actually going on, here in Maine. But you guys can find Jed on X at Yavel3386, YAVEL 3386, on X. So check him out, and obviously at some point you'll get a Facebook page going, I'm sure, a campaign page. But thank you for making the decision to run. Thank you for serving. I guess the fact that you served in the military doesn't surprise me that you'd be willing to stand up and serve your country and your state in another way. And so thank you for having the willingness to do that. And hopefully we can get some more Republicans elected here in the state of Maine, and not be ruled by our inferiors, the Democrats.
Yeah, thank you for having me. A great time talking to you. And that's exactly right. You got to step up if you don't want to be ruled by someone who's not as smart as you are.
Yeah, we got a lot of those in Augusta at the moment. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you all for watching. We will be, and you can just hang out for just a bit, Jed. We are going to be back here tomorrow, I believe. Yes, with John Andrade. And John Andrade, I call him the Portland Street Preacher. But he was on the podcast a while back, and you may remember he historically has stood outside Planned Parenthood in Portland, offering hope of the gospel. And he got sued by Maine's Attorney General, and had a recent, bit of a victory recently. And so he's going to share a little bit about that and just what's going on with his case tomorrow. And so we'll see you then. And then I think on Friday, it looks like we're going to have a National Committee woman, Lauren LePage.